The call comes at 2:47 a.m., pulling me from dreams that taste like bourbon and regret. In my line of work, middle-of-the-night phone calls usually mean someone's world has just collapsed, and tonight proves no exception. The woman's voice carries the particular strain that comes from 3 sleepless nights spent watching your child suffer from something you can't understand or fix. "Mr. Marshall, this is Linda Chen. My husband gave me your number. He said you help with unusual cases." Her voice drops to a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon the very forces she's trying to understand. "It's about my son Ethan. He's 12 and he knows things he shouldn't know." I sit up in the darkness of my apartment, muscle memory from 30 years of emergency calls overriding the comfortable weight of fatigue. "What kind of things, Mrs. Chen?" "He says our neighbor is going to die, says the man is playing the wrong music inside his body, and that someone gave him the wrong song." Linda's breathing becomes shallow, rapid. "Mr. Marshall, Ethan has never been wrong about these things. When his grandfather had his heart attack, Ethan knew 3 days early. When our mailman's wife was pregnant, he told us before she knew herself. And now he's telling you someone's going to die. Not just someone. Mr. Henderson, our 78-year-old neighbor. Ethan won't sleep, won't eat. He keeps staring at the wall between our houses and crying about wrong rhythms and borrowed time." Linda's voice cracks completely. "Mr. Marshall, what if he's right?" The drive to the Chen house takes me through suburban neighborhoods where the American dream sits in neat rows behind manicured lawns and 2-car garages. At 3:30 a.m., Millbrook looks like a movie set between takes. All the props in place, but none of the actors present to give them meaning. The Chen residence emerges from the darkness like a ship in troubled waters, every window blazing with light that speaks to the kind of crisis that makes sleep impossible. Linda Chen meets me at the door, her face carrying the hollow-eyed exhaustion of a mother who's been fighting battles she doesn't understand. She's still in yesterday's clothes, her nursing scrubs wrinkled and coffee-stained, suggesting she's been maintaining a vigil that extends far beyond normal parental concern. "He's in his room," she whispers, leading me through a house that feels charged with nervous energy. "He won't come downstairs, says there are too many wrong rhythms in the neighborhood, and he can't concentrate when they're all playing at once." The hallway to Ethan's room is lined with family photographs that tell the story of a child who's always been slightly out of step with the world around him. School pictures show a serious boy with intelligent eyes and the kind of focused intensity that suggests he's processing information on frequencies other children can't access. Birthday parties where he stands slightly apart from the group, not antisocial, but observing, listening to something the camera can't capture. "Ethan has Asperger's syndrome," Linda explains as we climb the stairs. "High-functioning autism with some unusual sensitivities. And he's epileptic, though his seizures are well controlled with medication. But this thing with people's rhythms, it started after his last Grand Mal episode 6 months ago." She pauses outside a door decorated with musical notation and mathematical equations, the kind of eclectic mix that suggests a mind that finds patterns. In places, most people see only chaos. His neurologist says some epileptics develop heightened sensitivity to electrical fields after major seizures, that maybe Ethan is picking up on people's bioelectric rhythms, heartbeats, brainwaves, nervous system activity. And he interprets this as music? Everything is music to Ethan. Always has been. He hears mathematical relationships as melodies, sees color patterns as symphonies. But now he's hearing something else, the internal rhythms of every person around him. And lately, those rhythms have been... She struggles for words. Wrong. I knock gently on the bedroom door, receiving no response except for the faint sound of movement inside. Linda opens it slowly, revealing a space that looks more like a research laboratory than a 12-year-old's bedroom. The walls are covered with hand-drawn charts that map musical notation alongside what appear to be heartbeat patterns, mathematical equations that relate frequency to physiological states, and detailed observations about the internal music of various family members, teachers, and neighbors. Ethan sits cross-legged on his bed, wearing noise-canceling headphones connected to a tablet that displays some kind of audio visualization software. He's thin for his age, with the pale complexion of someone who spends more time processing internal stimuli than engaging with the external world. When he looks up at me, his eyes hold the kind of intense focus that suggests he's already cataloging my internal rhythms before I introduce myself. "You have high blood pressure," he says without preamble, removing his headphones. "And your left knee makes discordant notes when you walk. Old injury, probably from when you were younger and thought you were invincible." The observation hits with startling accuracy. I've been taking medication for hypertension for 8 years, and my knee has ached every winter since I took shrapnel from an IED in Afghanistan 25 years ago. But there's no way a 12-year-old boy could know these things from watching me climb his stairs. "How do you know that, Ethan?" "Your heart rhythm has the syncopation that comes from arterial stress, and your breathing compensates for reduced oxygen efficiency. The knee, when you shift weight, there's a tiny hesitation in your gait that creates an irregular beat, like a drummer with a broken stick." He tilts his head, listening to something I can't hear. "But the sad music is loudest. Deep bass notes that started playing a long time ago and never stopped." The reference to sadness makes my chest tight with memories I thought I'd buried. Emma's laugh, Sarah's smile, the way my world collapsed 15 years ago when ice and bad timing took away everything that made life feel like more than just survival. "Ethan," I say carefully, "your mother tells me you're concerned about your neighbor." His expression shifts from analytical to deeply troubled, the kind of fear that comes from knowing something terrible is approaching and being powerless to stop it. "Mr. Henderson's music is all wrong. He's playing Mrs. Patterson's song and she's playing his. But their bodies don't know the difference, so they're slowly falling apart." "What do you mean, playing each other's songs?" Ethan reaches for a notebook filled with detailed musical notation, each page labeled with a name and date. He flips to a section marked Henderson Robert and shows me a series of musical patterns that grow increasingly discordant over the past several weeks. Everyone has their own internal music: heartbeat, breathing, neural activity, circulation patterns. Healthy people have harmony between these different rhythms. But Mr. Henderson, he points to the most recent entries where the musical notation looks chaotic, conflicting. He's playing music that belongs to someone with diabetes, insulin dependency, metabolic dysfunction, but his body is built for cardiovascular rhythms, blood pressure regulation, circulation support. The medical terminology coming from a 12-year-old is unsettling enough, but the certainty in his voice suggests this isn't theoretical speculation. "And Mrs. Patterson? She's playing heart medication music on a diabetic body, high blood pressure patterns, circulation enhancement, cardiac rhythm stabilization. But her pancreas doesn't understand why it's receiving signals meant for arteries." Ethan's hands begin to shake slightly, and he puts the headphones back on for a moment before removing them again. "It's like forcing a violin to play bass notes. The instrument can try, but eventually something breaks." Linda moves closer to her son, recognizing signs of approaching overload that I'm only beginning to understand. "Ethan, maybe we should take a break." "No." His voice carries urgent intensity. "Mr. Marshall needs to understand before it's too late. They're both going to die if someone doesn't fix their music. Mr. Henderson will have a massive heart attack because his body can't process diabetic medications. Mrs. Patterson will go into diabetic coma because her insulin regulation is being disrupted by cardiac drugs. How do you know they're taking each other's medications? Ethan looks at me with the expression of someone who's been asked to explain why water flows downhill, because that's the only way their music could get mixed up. Medications create chemical rhythms in the body. If Mr. Henderson is playing diabetic music, he's taking diabetic drugs. If Mrs. Patterson is playing cardiac music, she's taking heart medication. The logic is simple, elegant, and terrifying. If a 12-year-old boy with extraordinary sensitivity to bioelectric rhythms is right, two elderly neighbors are slowly poisoning each other with prescription medications they can't afford individually, but can share to reduce costs. When? I ask. Mr. Henderson has maybe 3 days before his heart rhythm becomes too irregular to sustain life. Mrs. Patterson has a week, maybe less, before her glucose regulation fails completely. Ethan's voice grows smaller, more childlike. And there are others. Mrs. Kowalski, 2 blocks over, is playing experimental music, rhythms I don't recognize, like someone is testing new songs on her body. Mr. Torres down the street has cancer music, but he's also playing pain medication rhythms that don't match his condition. The implications expand like ripples in dark water. If Ethan is right, the medication sharing extends far beyond 2 elderly neighbors trying to manage healthcare costs on fixed incomes. Someone is coordinating a network of prescription drug exchanges that's slowly killing the people it's supposed to help. Ethan, I say gently, I need you to listen to my rhythm again. Tell me what you hear. He removes his headphones and tilts his head, his expression growing more concentrated. The sadness is still there, deep, constant, like background music that never stops. But now there's something else. Determination rhythms, the kind of patterns people's bodies make when they decide to fight something instead of just enduring it. The observation is more accurate than any psychological evaluation I've ever received. The sadness is Emma and Sarah, the background music of loss that's played in my chest for 15 years. But the determination, that's newer, harder earned. The rhythm of someone who's learned that the only way to honor the dead is to protect the living. Mrs. Chen, I tell Linda, I need to speak with your neighbors, both of them. And I need Ethan to help me understand what we're hearing. But Linda's expression grows troubled. Mr. Marshall, Ethan can't. Being around people for too long is overwhelming for him. All those different rhythms, especially when they're wrong rhythms, they make him physically ill. Yesterday he tried to go to school and came home after 2 hours because he said the music was too loud and too wrong for him to concentrate. I look at Ethan, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way his hands continue to tremble, slightly. His gift comes with a price that no 12-year-old should have to pay. The constant awareness of other people's physical and emotional states, the inability to tune out the symphony of human suffering that surrounds him every day. What if we start small, I suggest, just Mr. Henderson, and if it becomes too much, we stop immediately. Ethan considers this, then nods slowly. I can try, but if the music gets too loud, I'll have to leave. Sometimes when people's rhythms are really wrong, they make my own rhythm start to change. And that's dangerous for someone like me. The walk to Robert Henderson's house is a journey of 50 yards that feels like crossing into enemy territory. Dawn is breaking over Millbrook with the pale reluctance of autumn morning light, casting everything in shades of gray that make the suburban landscape look more like a crime scene photograph than a neighborhood where people raise families and grow, old gracefully. Henderson's house shows signs of the kind of deferred maintenance that comes from living on Social Security and Medicare. Peeling paint, overgrown hedges, newspapers piling up on the front steps. But the windows are clean and the small garden is carefully tended, suggesting someone who still takes pride in appearances despite financial constraints. Ethan moves slowly beside me, his headphones around his neck but not over his ears, processing the ambient rhythms of the neighborhood like someone walking through a musical minefield. His breathing has become shallow and rapid, and I can see the physical effort it takes for him to filter the biological symphony surrounding us. "Too many wrong songs," he whispers as we approach Henderson's front door. "Mrs. Patterson next door, Mr. Chen across the street, even the mailman who's about to start his route. Everyone's playing music that doesn't match their bodies." I knock on Henderson's door, noting the way Ethan positions himself slightly behind me, using my larger frame as a buffer against whatever overwhelming sensory input he's processing. The man who answers has the weathered appearance of someone who's spent decades working with his hands, probably construction or manufacturing, and the careful movements of someone managing chronic pain. "Mr. Henderson? I'm Ray Marshall, private investigator. I'm looking into some concerns about medication safety in the neighborhood." Henderson's expression immediately grows guarded, the way people's faces change when they realize their private business might become public scrutiny. "I don't know what you're talking about." But before he can close the door, Ethan steps forward with the direct honesty that only children possess. "Mr. Henderson, you're going to die if you keep taking Mrs. Patterson's diabetes medicine. Your heart doesn't understand insulin rhythms, and it's getting confused." The blunt statement hits Henderson like a physical blow. He staggers backward, one hand reaching for the doorframe to steady himself, and I catch a glimpse of the medication bottles on the table behind him. Far more than any single person should need, with labels that show multiple names and multiple prescribing physicians. "How did you—" Henderson starts, then stops, looking at Ethan with the expression of someone who's just been told a secret he thought he'd hidden successfully. "I can hear your body's music," Ethan explains with the matter-of-fact tone he might use to discuss the weather. "Everyone has their own internal rhythm, heartbeat, breathing, nervous system activity. But you're playing Mrs. Patterson's song now, and she's playing yours. Your bodies are getting mixed up, and that's really dangerous." Henderson sinks into a chair near the door, his face going pale in a way that suggests Ethan's observation has confirmed fears he's been trying to ignore. "The boy's right. Betty and we've been sharing our medications. Neither of us can afford the full prescriptions on our own, so we figured—" "How long has this been going on?" I ask. 3 months, maybe 4. Started when my insurance stopped covering one of my heart medications, $400 a month for pills I need to stay alive. Betty's in the same boat with her diabetes supplies, so we worked out an arrangement." Ethan tilts his head, listening to Henderson's biological rhythms with the focused intensity of a musician tuning an instrument. "Your heart rhythm is already irregular, dangerous irregular, and your blood sugar levels are fluctuating in ways that don't match your pancreatic function." Henderson nods slowly, as if hearing medical facts he's been trying to deny. "I've been feeling off. Chest pains, dizziness, confusion. Betty's been having problems too, fatigue, increased thirst, vision issues." "Mr. Henderson," I say carefully, "is anyone else involved in this arrangement? Other neighbors, other medications?" The question hangs in the air like smoke from a fire that hasn't been fully discovered yet. Henderson's expression shifts from embarrassment to something that might be fear or might be recognition that he's stumbled into something much larger than a simple cost-saving measure between friends. "There's a nurse," he says quietly. "Susan Walsh. She works at the Sunset Manor Hospice, knows about medications, medical conditions. She's been helping coordinate things." making sure people with similar conditions can share resources safely. Ethan's breathing suddenly becomes more rapid, and he takes a step backward as if Henderson's words have triggered some kind of physiological alarm. The music just changed. Your rhythm changed when you said her name. Fear patterns, guilt rhythms, and something else. He looks up at me with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. Shame. The kind of music people's bodies make when they know they're doing something wrong, but feel like they don't have a choice. Before I can respond, a woman's voice calls from the house next door. Robert, is everything all right over there? Betty Patterson appears on her front porch, moving with the careful gait of someone managing diabetes-related neuropathy. She's wearing a housecoat and slippers, her white hair uncombed, suggesting she's been awakened by our conversation. Betty, Henderson calls back, these folks are asking about our arrangement. Patterson's expression immediately becomes wary, defensive. What kind of folks? I identify myself and explain our concerns about medication safety, but Betty's response carries the sharp edge of someone who's been backed into a corner too many times by systems that promise help but deliver bureaucracy. You here to lecture us about following doctor's orders? She snaps. Easy to follow orders when you can afford the prescriptions. My insulin costs more than my monthly grocery budget. Robert's heart medication costs more than his rent. You tell me how we're supposed to choose between staying alive and keeping a roof over our heads. Ethan steps forward again, his voice gentler than it was with Henderson. Mrs. Patterson, I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just don't want you to die. Your body is playing heart music now, but it's built for diabetes rhythms. The confusion is making you sicker. Betty studies Ethan with the careful attention that elderly people sometimes bring to children who seem unusually perceptive. You're the Chen boy. Your mother mentioned you have sensitivities. I can hear when people's internal music doesn't match their bodies, and yours doesn't match anymore. Neither does Mr. Henderson's. Ethan's hands begin to tremble again, and I can see the effort it's taking for him to maintain focus while processing the biological chaos around him. But there's something else. Someone else's music mixed in with yours and Mr. Henderson's, like a conductor who's been changing the songs. The observation stops all conversation. Henderson and Patterson exchange glances that suggest they understand exactly what Ethan means, but they're not sure whether acknowledging it will help their situation or make it infinitely worse. Mrs. Patterson, I say carefully, this nurse who's been helping coordinate medication sharing, Susan Walsh, what exactly has she been doing? Betty's shoulders sag with the weight of someone who's been carrying a secret that's grown too heavy to bear, alone. She said it was a medical study, that pharmaceutical companies need data about how different medications work in real-world conditions, not just controlled laboratory settings. My blood turns cold. What kind of data? How we respond to different dosages, different combinations, different administration schedules. Susan said elderly people often need medication adjustments that doctors are too cautious to prescribe, so the pharmaceutical companies sponsor community-based research to gather better information. Henderson nods reluctantly. She pays us $500 a month each to participate. Detailed logs of symptoms, energy levels, side effects, quality of life measures. Professional medical monitoring without the bureaucracy of formal clinical trials. The pieces fall into place with sickening clarity. Susan Walsh isn't facilitating medication sharing out of compassion for elderly people struggling with healthcare costs. She's conducting unauthorized medical experiments using financial desperation to recruit test subjects who can't afford proper medical care. How many people are involved? I ask. 12, maybe 15 in our neighborhood, Betty admits. Different conditions, different medications, all coordinated through Susan's program. She matches people based on their medical needs and monitors the results. Ethan suddenly grabs my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for such a thin child. "We need to leave. Now. The music is getting too loud. Too many wrong rhythms playing at once. I can't." His breathing becomes rapid and shallow, and I recognize the signs of approaching panic attack or worse. "Thank you for your honesty," I tell Henderson and Patterson, "but we need to get Ethan somewhere quiet." As we walk quickly back toward the Chen house, Ethan stumbles and nearly falls. I catch his arm, feeling the way his entire body trembles with the effort of processing sensory input that's overwhelming his nervous system. "Too many people playing wrong songs," he gasps, "and someone else, someone who's been listening to our conversation. Their rhythm is—" He stops walking completely, his face going pale. "Predator rhythms, like a cat watching mice, waiting for the right moment to strike." I scan the neighborhood, noting the cars parked along the street, the windows where curtains might hide observing eyes, the early morning joggers and dog walkers who might not be what they appear. If Susan Walsh has been conducting unauthorized medical experiments on elderly residents, she has strong motivation to monitor and control any investigation into her activities. "Can you make it home?" I ask Ethan. He nods, but I can see the effort it takes for him to put one foot in front of the other. Whatever gift allows him to perceive other people's biological rhythms, it comes with a cost that's written in the dark circles under his eyes and the way his hands shake when the sensory input becomes too intense. Linda meets us at the front door, immediately recognizing her son's distress. "Ethan? What happened?" "Too many wrong songs," he whispers, allowing his mother to guide him inside. "And someone watching who doesn't want us to fix the music." As Linda helps Ethan to his room, I remain on the front porch, studying the neighborhood with new awareness of the human drama hidden behind suburban facades. 12 to 15 elderly residents participating in unauthorized medical experiments, motivated by financial desperation and coordinated by someone with medical knowledge and pharmaceutical connections. My phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. "Stop interfering with medical procedures you don't understand. Some people choose their own deaths." The message carries the casual authority of someone accustomed to having their warnings taken seriously. But threats stopped intimidating me years ago, around the time I realized that losing everything worth protecting makes you fearless in ways that surprise both predators and prey. I text back, "Some people exploit desperation for profit. That stops now." The response comes immediately. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Mr. Marshall." But they're wrong. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, the same thing I've been fighting for 30 years in various forms. People with power who prey on people without options, systems that serve institutions instead of individuals, the careful bureaucracy of evil that hides behind professional credentials and regulatory authority. The only difference this time is that I have a 12-year-old ally who can hear the truth in people's biological rhythms, even when their words are carefully designed to obscure it. The next phase of the investigation requires resources I don't have and authority I've never possessed, but it also requires something I've spent 15 years developing: the willingness to stand between predators and their prey, regardless of the cost to myself. My phone rings, and Linda Chen's voice carries a new kind of urgency. "Mr. Marshall, Ethan wants to show you something. He says it's about the nurse, and it's important." I find Ethan in his room, surrounded by musical notation and biological rhythm charts that map the internal symphonies of everyone in his neighborhood. But now he's created something new, a detailed comparison chart that shows how specific medications create identifiable rhythm patterns in human bodies. "Look," he says, pointing to parallel columns of musical notation. This is Mr. Henderson's natural heart rhythm, and this is how his rhythm changes when he takes his prescribed cardiac medication. Perfect harmony. The drugs support his natural biological functions. He moves to another section of the chart. But this is Mr. Henderson's rhythm when he takes Mrs. Patterson's diabetes medication. Dissonance, conflict, increasing irregularity. His heart doesn't understand insulin signals, so it starts missing beats. And Mrs. Patterson? Same pattern in reverse. Her natural rhythm with diabetes medication, harmony, her rhythm with cardiac drugs, chaos. Ethan's finger traces the musical notations like a composer reading a complex score. But here's what's really interesting. He shows me a third section of the chart, where the musical patterns become even more complex and discordant. This is Mrs. Kowalski's rhythm pattern. She's 85, has cancer, takes standard pain medication. But 3 times a week her rhythm changes to something I've never heard before. Experimental music, like someone is testing new songs on her body. What kind of experimental music? Patterns that don't match any known medication categories. Complex chemical rhythms that suggest multiple drug interactions, novel pharmaceutical compounds, dosage levels that fluctuate in ways that seem designed to test tolerance thresholds rather than provide consistent treatment. The implications make my chest tight with a combination of rage and dread. If Ethan's analysis is correct, Susan Walsh isn't just facilitating medication sharing. She's conducting Phase 1 drug trials on elderly patients without proper informed consent, using their financial desperation to recruit test subjects for experimental pharmaceuticals. Ethan, how certain are you about this? Music doesn't lie, he says, with the absolute certainty that only children possess. Mrs. Kowalski's body is playing songs that don't exist in any medical textbook. Someone is composing new music and using her as the instrument. Before I can respond, Linda appears in the doorway with an expression that suggests our conversation has attracted unwanted attention. Mr. Marshall, there's someone here to see you. She says she's from the county health department. The woman waiting in the Chen living room introduces herself as Dr. Sandra Mills, County Public Health Supervisor, and presents credentials that look official and probably are. She's professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase that suggests bureaucratic authority, and wearing the kind of confident expression that comes from having institutional power behind her requests. Mr. Marshall, I understand you've been investigating medication irregularities in this neighborhood. I'm here to discuss proper procedures for reporting pharmaceutical concerns. What kind of proper procedures? Anonymous reporting through established channels, cooperation with licensed medical professionals, avoiding actions that might interfere with ongoing public health initiatives. Dr. Mills settles into the chair across from me with the casual authority of someone who expects her suggestions to be followed without question. Sometimes, community-based medication management programs can appear concerning to outsiders who don't understand the full scope of medical supervision involved. The careful language sends up red flags that have nothing to do with Ethan's unusual abilities. Are you familiar with Susan Walsh's work in this community? Ms. Walsh is a licensed nurse practitioner working under proper medical supervision. Her community outreach programs have been valuable resources for elderly residents struggling with health care access and affordability. Dr. Mills opens her briefcase and pulls out several official-looking documents. These are standard public health protocols for reporting medication concerns. I'd be happy to help you file appropriate reports through proper channels. But before she can continue, Ethan appears in the living room doorway, still wearing his noise-canceling headphones, but clearly processing whatever biological information Dr. Mills is broadcasting. She's lying, he says with the matter-of-fact tone he might use to comment on the weather. Her heart rhythm does the thing people's rhythms do when they're saying words that don't match what they really think. Doctor. Mills's professional composure falters slightly. Excuse me? Your body is playing nervous music, the kind of rhythms people have when they're trying to protect something they know is wrong. And there's guilt music too, deep and quiet, like background notes you're trying to ignore. Ethan tilts his head, listening to signals I can't perceive. You know Mrs. Kowalski is being hurt by the experimental drugs, but you're more afraid of getting in trouble than you are of letting her die. The accusation lands like a bomb in the suburban living room. Doctor. Mills stares at Ethan with the expression of someone who's just watched a card trick that violated the laws of physics, while Linda moves protectively closer to her son. That's quite an imagination, Doctor, Mills says carefully, but her voice has lost its confident authority. Imagination doesn't create biological rhythm analysis, I point out. Either Ethan is reading information that exists, or he's the most sophisticated fraud I've ever encountered. And 12-year-old boys generally aren't sophisticated frauds. Dr. Mills's phone buzzes, and she glances at it with relief that suggests salvation, arriving at precisely the right moment. I'm afraid I have another appointment. Mr. Marshall, I strongly encourage you to follow proper reporting procedures and avoid actions that might compromise ongoing medical supervision. After she leaves, the house feels different, heavier, more dangerous, as if our conversation has attracted the attention of forces that prefer to operate without public scrutiny. She knows about Mrs. Kowalski, Ethan says quietly. And she's scared because someone important is going to be angry that we found out. Who's Mrs. Kowalski exactly? Linda Chen, who's been listening with growing concern, speaks up. Eleanor Kowalski. Lives 2 blocks over, been battling cancer for 3 years. Her husband died last winter and she's been struggling to manage medical expenses on her own. The perfect test subject, I realize. Isolated, desperate, dealing with a terminal condition that makes experimental treatment seem reasonable. Ethan nods, sadly. Her music gets weaker every week. The experimental drugs are fighting with her cancer medications, and her body doesn't know which rhythm to follow. She's going to die, but not from cancer, from the confusion. The investigation has evolved from medication sharing between neighbors to systematic medical experimentation on vulnerable elderly patients. And now we have evidence that public health officials are either complicit in the program or actively working to cover it up. Ethan, I say carefully, I need to ask you to do something that might be difficult. I need you to listen to Mrs. Kowalski's rhythms directly, in person, so we can document exactly what's happening to her. His face goes pale. In person means being close to someone whose music is really wrong. Sometimes when people's rhythms are that broken, being near them makes my own rhythm start to change, and for someone with epilepsy, it could trigger a seizure, Linda finishes, her protective instincts immediately activated. Mr. Marshall, I can't let you put my son at risk. But Mrs. Kowalski is going to die if we don't document what's being done to her, I point out. And there might be others. Elderly people being used as test subjects for experimental drugs without proper informed consent. The moral calculus is brutal. Risk one child's safety to potentially save multiple elderly lives, weigh individual. Protection against collective justice. Choose between the devil we can manage and the one we're still discovering. Ethan looks between his mother and me, processing the dilemma with the serious consideration that seems to characterize everything he does. I'll try, he says finally, but if the music gets too loud, if my own rhythm starts to change, I have to leave immediately. Ethan, Linda starts. Mom, Mrs. Kowalski used to give me cookies when I walked past her house. Before she got sick, before her music got broken. His voice carries the kind of determined sadness that comes from children who understand loss in ways they shouldn't have to. If I can help fix her music even a little bit, I want to try. The walk to Eleanor Kowalski's house is a journey through suburban geography that feels increasingly surreal with each step. Normal houses hiding abnormal secrets, elderly residents participating in medical experiments disguised as community assistants, public health officials covering up systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations. Ethan moves slowly beside me, his breathing already becoming shallow as we approach the source of whatever biological chaos he's been detecting from 2 blocks away. He's removed his headphones entirely now, processing the full symphony of neighborhood rhythms with the focused intensity of someone analyzing a complex musical composition. "It's getting louder," he whispers, as we turn onto Kowalski's street. Not just her broken music, but other wrong rhythms, too. Like there's a whole orchestra of people playing songs that don't match their bodies. Eleanor Kowalski's house shows the signs of someone who's been managing a terminal illness on a fixed income, peeling paint, overgrown yard, newspapers accumulating, on the front steps. But the windows are clean, and there are still flowers planted in neat rows beside the front door, suggesting someone who maintains dignity despite declining circumstances. The woman who answers our knock is obviously ill, pale, thin, moving with the careful gait of someone managing both pain and fatigue. But her eyes are alert and intelligent, and she greets us with the kind of courtesy that suggests a lifetime of treating unexpected visitors with respect. "Mrs. Kowalski, I'm Ray Marshall, private investigator. This is Ethan Chen. We're looking into concerns about medication safety in the neighborhood." Eleanor's expression immediately becomes guarded. "I don't know what you mean." But Ethan steps forward with his characteristic directness. "Mrs. Kowalski, you're taking drugs that aren't supposed to exist yet. Your body is playing experimental music, and it's making your cancer music even more confused." The blunt statement hits Eleanor like a physical blow. She staggers backward, one hand reaching for the doorframe to steady herself, and I catch a glimpse of multiple pill bottles on the table behind her, far more than any cancer patient should need, with labels that show dosage schedules that change weekly. "How did you know?" she whispers. "I can hear your body's rhythm. Everyone has their own internal music, but yours is—" Ethan pauses, struggling to find words for something that exists beyond normal language. "It's like someone took your natural song and mixed it with music that hasn't been written yet. Experimental melodies that your body doesn't know how to play." Eleanor sinks into a chair near the door, her face reflecting the kind of weary resignation that comes from carrying secrets that have grown too heavy to bear alone. "The nurse said it was my only chance. Said the experimental treatments might give me more time, maybe even cure the cancer." "What nurse?" "Susan Walsh. She works with pharmaceutical companies that develop new cancer treatments. Said they needed patients who were willing to try drugs that hadn't been approved yet, people who didn't have other options." Eleanor's voice grows smaller. "She pays me $200 a month to participate. That's more than my Social Security check." The financial motivation makes perfect sense and simultaneously turns my stomach. Elderly cancer patients on fixed incomes, facing both terminal diagnosis and financial ruin, presented with experimental treatments that offer hope and immediate cash payments. "What kind of experimental treatments?" I ask. Eleanor reaches for a folder on the table beside her chair, pulling out medical forms and pharmaceutical documentation that looks sophisticated and probably fraudulent. Different drug combinations every 2 weeks, detailed monitoring of symptoms, energy levels, tumor progression, quality of life measures, Professional medical supervision without the years of waiting for FDA approval. Ethan tilts his head, listening to Eleanor's biological rhythms with growing distress. The experimental music is fighting with your cancer medication. Your body doesn't know which rhythm to follow, so everything is getting more confused. And there's something else. His face scrunches in concentration. Pain music that doesn't match cancer pain. Like the experimental drugs are creating new kinds of hurt that your body has never felt before. Eleanor nods sadly. The side effects have been challenging. Nausea, fatigue, confusion, strange aches in places where I've never had cancer. But Susan says that's normal for experimental treatments. The body needs time to adjust to new medications. Mrs. Kowalski, I say gently, how many other people in this neighborhood are participating in experimental treatment programs? 5 or 6 that I know of. Different conditions, different experimental drugs, all coordinated through Susan's pharmaceutical contacts. Eleanor's hands shake slightly as she organizes her medical paperwork. She said pharmaceutical companies need real-world data about how new medications work in community settings, not just controlled laboratory environments. Ethan suddenly grabs my arm, his grip tight with urgent alarm. We need to leave. Now. Her rhythm is changing. The experimental music is getting louder, and it's making my own music start to shift. I can see the physical effort it takes for him to remain standing, the way his entire body trembles with the effort of processing. Biological chaos that's overwhelming his nervous system. But before we can leave, Eleanor reaches out to touch Ethan's hand. Wait, she says quietly. This boy, he really can hear what's happening inside my body? Yes, I tell her. And what he's hearing suggests the experimental treatments are making you sicker, not better. Eleanor studies Ethan's face with the careful attention that elderly people sometimes bring to children who seem unusually perceptive. My husband would have said, "You have the gift." He believed some people could see things others couldn't, hear things that ordinary ears miss. What do you hear when you listen to yourself, Mrs. Kowalski? Ethan asks, his voice growing weaker as the sensory overload continues to affect him. Confusion, fear, and lately, she pauses, listening to something that might be internal awareness, or might be the wisdom that comes from facing mortality with clear eyes. Lately, I've been wondering if the treatments are helping me live longer, or just making dying take longer. The distinction hits like a revelation that changes everything. Eleanor Kowalski isn't participating in experimental cancer treatment. She's being slowly poisoned by pharmaceutical compounds that create the appearance of medical intervention while actually accelerating her decline. Mrs. Kowalski, I say carefully, would you be willing to speak with legitimate medical authorities about what's being done to you? What authorities? Susan said the county health department approved her program, that everything was legal and properly supervised. Eleanor's voice carries the frustration of someone who's discovered that institutional protection doesn't always protect the people who need it most. Not the county health department, federal authorities who investigate medical fraud and unauthorized human experimentation. Eleanor considers this, then nods slowly. If it helps other people avoid what I've been going through, yes. But I don't have much time. The cancer is real, and it's getting worse, regardless of what Susan's experimental drugs are doing. As we prepare to leave, Ethan turns back to Eleanor with an expression of profound sadness. Mrs. Kowalski, your natural music, the rhythm your body wants to play, it's still there. Quiet, but still there. If you stop taking the experimental drugs, your body could remember its own song. And the cancer? The cancer has its own music, too. But at least that's music your body understands. The experimental rhythms are foreign. like forcing a piano to play violin music. The drive back to the Chen house passes in silence, heavy with implications that none of us want to voice. Ethan sits in the passenger seat with his headphones on, trying to filter out the biological symphony that continues to overwhelm his nervous system. Eleanor Kowalski's experimental music has left its mark on him, a kind of sympathetic resonance that suggests his gift comes with risks I'm only beginning to understand. "Ethan," I say as we pull into his driveway, "are you all right?" He removes his headphones and looks at me with those eerily perceptive eyes. "My rhythm is still my own, but it's wobbly, like when you hear a song that's so wrong it makes your own humming go off-key." He pauses, processing sensations that exist beyond normal experience. "Mrs. Kowalski's experimental music is contagious somehow. Being near it makes other people's rhythms want to match it. The observation suggests that unauthorized medical experimentation might have effects that extend beyond individual test subjects, that experimental pharmaceutical compounds could create biological resonance effects that influence entire communities. We need to document everything," I tell him. "Your rhythm analyses, Mrs. Kowalski's medical records, the names of other participants, the pharmaceutical companies involved. And then what?" It's a simple question with complex implications. Expose a medical fraud operation that's exploiting elderly people's desperation and potentially poisoning entire neighborhoods? Challenge institutional authority that extends from local health departments to federal regulatory agencies? Risk the safety of a 12-year-old boy whose extraordinary abilities make him both an invaluable witness and an obvious target? Then we make sure the music stops, I tell him, and we help people remember their own songs. But even as I say it, I know the real battle is just beginning. Susan Walsh's operation represents something larger than individual criminal behavior. It's a symptom of a healthcare system that values profit over patients and bureaucratic efficiency over human welfare. And somewhere in the complex web of pharmaceutical companies, regulatory agencies, and medical institutions, powerful people are making decisions that reduce Eleanor Kowalski and her neighbors to data points in research studies that prioritize scientific advancement over human survival. My phone buzzes with another anonymous text. "Last warning, Mr. Marshall. Some symphonies are too complex for private investigators to conduct." But they're wrong again. I've been conducting symphonies of justice for 30 years, even when the music was discordant and the audience was hostile. The only difference now is that I have a 12-year-old collaborator who can hear the truth in people's biological rhythms, even when their words are carefully composed to obscure it. The next movement in this particular symphony promises to be both beautiful and terrible, the sound of truth finally being heard above the noise of institutional deception. The federal building in Albany rises from the downtown landscape like a monument to bureaucratic authority, all glass and steel, and the kind of architectural gravitas that's designed to remind visitors that important decisions are made here by people with more power than individual citizens typically possess. But today, that institutional authority might actually serve justice instead of just processing it. Special Agent Jennifer Torres, FBI White-Collar Crime Division, meets us in a conference room that smells of coffee and the particular tension that comes from investigating corruption in systems that most people trust implicitly. She's younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, but her eyes carry the kind of focused intelligence that suggests she's seen enough institutional deception to approach every case with appropriate skepticism. "Mr. Marshall, Mrs. Chen, Ethan." Agent Torres nods to each of us in turn, her attention lingering on Ethan with the careful assessment that law enforcement professionals bring to unusual witnesses. "I understand you have information about unauthorized medical experimentation in Millbrook." Linda sits beside her son with the protective vigilance of a mother who's watched her child navigate a world that doesn't understand his extraordinary abilities. Ethan himself appears calmer here than he did in the neighborhood. Fewer people, more controlled environment, biological rhythms that presumably aren't corrupted by experimental pharmaceuticals. Agent Torres, I begin. We have evidence that a nurse named Susan Walsh has been conducting unauthorized drug trials on elderly residents, using their financial desperation to recruit test subjects for experimental pharmaceuticals. What kind of evidence? I spread Eleanor Kowalski's medical documentation across the conference table, pharmaceutical forms, dosage schedules, payment records that show monthly transfers from accounts linked to Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The paper trail tells the story of systematic exploitation disguised as community healthcare assistance. But it's Ethan who provides the evidence that transforms bureaucratic documentation into human tragedy. Mrs. Kowalski's body is playing music that doesn't exist in any medical textbook, he explains with the matter-of-fact tone he brings to all rhythm analysis. Someone is testing new pharmaceutical compounds on her without telling her that's what they're doing. And the experimental drugs are making her cancer worse, not better. Agent Torres leans forward, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to genuine interest. Ethan, when you say you can hear people's biological rhythms, what exactly does that mean? Everyone has internal music. Heartbeat, breathing, nervous system activity, circulation patterns. Healthy people have harmony between these different rhythms. Sick people have discordant music. And people taking medications have chemical rhythms that either support their natural music or fight against it. He pulls out his notebook, showing Agent Torres the detailed musical notation he's created to map biological patterns. This is Mrs. Kowalski's natural rhythm with standard cancer medication. The drugs support her body's natural functions. But this is her rhythm with experimental compounds, chaos, conflict, chemical patterns that don't match any known pharmaceutical categories. Agent Torres studies the musical notation with the careful attention that federal investigators bring to evidence that might crack open major criminal conspiracies. Ethan, how certain are you that these experimental compounds are harming Mrs. Kowalski? Music doesn't lie, he says with absolute certainty. Her body is trying to play 3 different songs at once. Cancer music, legitimate medication music, and experimental rhythms that don't belong in human biology. The confusion is killing her faster than the cancer would. And there are others? 12 to 15 people in our neighborhood. Different conditions, different experimental drugs, all coordinated through Susan Walsh's program. Ethan's voice grows quieter, more distressed. Their music gets more broken every week. Some of them are going to die not because they're sick, but because their bodies can't process the chemical chaos. Agent Torres makes notes with the methodical precision of someone building a federal case. Mr. Marshall, what led you to investigate this situation? Ethan detected irregular biological rhythms in 2 elderly neighbors who were sharing prescription medications to manage healthcare costs. When we investigated further, we discovered the medication sharing was being coordinated by Susan Walsh as part of a larger program that she claimed was community-based medical research, but actually was unauthorized human experimentation. Using elderly people's financial desperation to recruit test subjects for pharmaceutical compounds that haven't been approved for human use. I show Agent Torres the payment records and pharmaceutical documentation. Meridian Pharmaceuticals pays participants $500 to $200 per month for detailed symptom logs and biological monitoring. Agent Torres's expression grows darker as she processes the implications. Phase 1 drug trials conducted outside regulatory oversight using vulnerable populations who can't afford legitimate medical care. With local health department officials providing cover, Linda adds, speaking up for the first time since we arrived. Dr. Sandra Mills from County Public Health tried to discourage our investigation, claiming Susan Walsh was working under proper medical supervision. Did she provide documentation of that supervision? Just bureaucratic forms and suggestions that we follow proper reporting procedures instead of investigating directly. Agent Torres closes her notebook and looks at each of us with the kind of serious expression that suggests our information has confirmed suspicions she's been developing about broader patterns of medical fraud. What we're discussing represents multiple federal crimes: mail fraud, wire fraud, violations of informed consent regulations, unauthorized human experimentation, and potentially conspiracy to commit murder if participants have died as a result of experimental treatments. She pauses, letting the gravity of the charges settle. But prosecuting this case will require testimony from people like Mrs. Kowalski, and that means putting elderly victims through the stress of federal legal proceedings. What about Ethan's testimony? Linda asks. Ethan's abilities are unique. His rhythm analysis provides compelling evidence of pharmaceutical effects, but federal courts generally require testimony that can be verified through conventional medical examination. Agent Torres looks at Ethan with something that might be respect or might be recognition of how difficult it would be to explain his gift to a jury. However, his analysis can guide us toward specific medical tests that could document the same biological effects through traditional means. Ethan tilts his head, listening to Agent Torres with that focused intensity he brings to all biological rhythm analysis. You're telling the truth about wanting to help the elderly people, but you're worried about something else. Music in your own rhythm that suggests you've seen cases like this before. Agent Torres's professional composure falters slightly. What do you mean? Fear patterns, frustration rhythms, and something that sounds like guilt music? Deep and quiet, like background notes you're trying to ignore. Ethan's voice grows gentler. You know this problem is bigger than just Susan Walsh and Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The observation lands with obvious impact. Agent Torres stares at Ethan with the expression of someone who's just been told a secret she thought she'd hidden successfully. Ethan's right, she says finally. We've been investigating similar operations in 3 other states. Unauthorized pharmaceutical testing on elderly populations, always targeting people with chronic conditions and limited financial resources. Always coordinated through healthcare workers who have legitimate access to vulnerable patients. How many people? Hundreds, possibly thousands. And the pharmaceutical companies involved aren't just testing new drugs. They're gathering data about drug interactions, dosage effects, and biological responses that they could never obtain through legitimate clinical trials. The scope of the conspiracy expands like ripples in dark water. Eleanor Kowalski and her neighbors aren't isolated victims. They're part of a systematic exploitation of elderly Americans who can't afford proper medical care and therefore become involuntary test subjects for experimental pharmaceuticals. Agent Torres, I say carefully, what do you need from us to build a case that will shut down this operation? Documented medical evidence of pharmaceutical effects, testimony from participants who are willing to go on record, financial records linking payments to specific pharmaceutical companies, and communication records that show coordination between Susan Walsh and her supervisors. And Susan Walsh herself? We'll need to approach her carefully. If she realizes she's under federal investigation, she could destroy evidence and disappear before we can build an airtight case. Agent Torres looks at Ethan with growing respect. But Ethan's ability to detect biological effects might give us an advantage she doesn't expect. What kind of advantage? If Ethan can identify other participants in the experimental program by analyzing their biological rhythms, we can approach them as concerned investigators rather than obvious federal agents. That might convince more people to cooperate with our investigation. Ethan considers this, then nods slowly. I can map the wrong music in our neighborhood, but being around that many broken rhythms for extended periods. He looks at his mother with obvious concern. It makes my own rhythm start to change, and for someone with epilepsy, that's dangerous. Linda's protective instincts immediately activate. Agent Torres, I can't let you put my son at risk to build a federal case. I understand your concern, Mrs. Chen, but if we can document this conspiracy properly, we might be able to save hundreds of elderly people from being slowly poisoned by experimental drugs. Agent Torres turns to Ethan with genuine respect. Ethan, would you be willing to help us identify other participants with appropriate breaks to manage the sensory overload? Ethan looks between his mother and Agent Torres, processing the moral calculus with the serious consideration he brings to everything. If it helps fix their music, if it stops the experimental rhythms from making people sicker, I'll try. But I need to be able to leave when the music gets too loud. Agreed. As we prepare to leave the federal building, Agent Torres hands me her card with a phone number written on the back. Mr. Marshall, if Susan Walsh or her associates attempt to interfere with your investigation, call this number immediately. And if Ethan detects any changes in the neighborhood's biological patterns, if the experimental music suddenly stops or changes dramatically, that might mean they're destroying evidence or moving the operation. The drive back to Millbrook passes, through rural landscape that looks deceptively peaceful. Rolling hills and small towns that hide their own secrets behind facades of agricultural prosperity and suburban normalcy. But now I know that similar medical exploitation is probably occurring in communities across multiple states, elderly people being slowly poisoned by pharmaceutical companies that see human suffering as research opportunities. Mr. Marshall, Ethan says as we approach the Millbrook city limits, the wrong music is getting louder. Not just Mrs. Kowalski's experimental rhythms, but other people too. Like someone turned up the volume on all the broken songs. What does that mean? Either more people are taking experimental drugs, or the people who were already taking them are getting higher doses. His face scrunches in concentration as he processes biological information I can't perceive. And there's something else. New music, patterns I don't recognize, like someone introduced completely different experimental compounds. The implications make my chest tight with mounting dread. If Susan Walsh has realized her operation is under investigation, she might be accelerating the experimental timeline or introducing new pharmaceutical compounds that eliminate evidence by eliminating test subjects. We need to check on Mrs. Kowalski, I tell Linda, and the other participants. But as we turn onto Eleanor Kowalski's street, Ethan suddenly grabs my arm with urgent alarm. Stop the car. Something's wrong. Her music. His breathing becomes rapid, shallow. Her music stopped. Eleanor Kowalski's house sits in afternoon sunlight that makes everything look normal and peaceful, but the ambulance parked in her driveway tells a different story. EMTs are loading a covered gurney into the back of the vehicle, while neighbors gather in small clusters, whispering about sudden illness and unexpected tragedy. I approach one of the EMTs, identifying myself as a private investigator working with federal authorities. What happened to Mrs. Kowalski? Elderly woman, cancer patient, found unresponsive this morning by her neighbor. Appears to be medication-related incident. Probably took the wrong combination of drugs. The EMT's expression carries the professional sympathy that comes from dealing with elderly people who can't manage complex medication schedules. Family said she'd been participating in some kind of experimental treatment program, but they couldn't provide details. Ethan stands beside the ambulance, his face pale with the kind of grief that comes from hearing someone's music stop forever. The experimental rhythms got so loud they drowned out everything else. Her body forgot how to play its own song. Eleanor Kowalski died not from cancer, but from pharmaceutical chaos that overwhelmed her biological systems. And if Ethan is right about the neighborhood's increasing musical disruption, she might not be the last victim of Susan Walsh's experimental program. My phone buzzes with a text from Agent Torres. Local reports of 3 elderly deaths in past 24 hours. All participants in experimental programs. Evidence suggests acceleration of elimination timeline. The conspiracy has entered its final phase, destroying evidence by destroying the people who testify about unauthorized medical experimentation. And somewhere in the network of pharmaceutical companies, healthcare workers, and regulatory officials, decisions are being made that prioritize institutional protection over human life. We need to find Susan Walsh, I tell Linda and Ethan, before she kills anyone else. But Ethan shakes his head sadly. Her music is gone too. Not dead gone, but absent, like she left when she realized people were listening to the wrong songs. Susan Walsh has disappeared, leaving behind elderly victims whose experimental music will die with them, pharmaceutical companies that will deny any knowledge of unauthorized testing, and a healthcare system that values profit over patients. The only evidence remaining is a 12-year-old boy who can hear the truth in people's biological rhythms, even when that truth has been buried beneath layers of institutional deception and bureaucratic denial. Sometimes the most important music is the kind that only children can hear. 3 weeks later, I sit in Ethan Chen's bedroom, listening to him play a simple melody on an old piano keyboard that his parents bought after realizing their son needed to create music instead of just analyzing it. The notes are tentative but genuine, the sound of someone learning to compose his own rhythms instead of constantly processing other people's biological chaos. It's different now, he tells me, his fingers finding harmonies that suggest peace rather than the discordant complexity we discovered in his neighborhood. Most people's music is back to normal. Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson are taking their own medications again, and their rhythms match their bodies. And the others? The experimental music stopped when Mrs. Kowalski died. Everyone else who was taking the wrong drugs, their bodies remembered their own songs when the chemical confusion ended. Ethan's playing grows more confident, more personal. But some of the music is quieter now, sadder, like people who survived something terrible but lost friends along the way. Agent Torres's investigation resulted in federal charges against Susan Walsh, Meridian Pharmaceuticals, and 3 public health officials who provided regulatory cover for unauthorized medical experimentation. But Susan Walsh remains missing, probably protected by pharmaceutical companies with resources that extend far beyond federal jurisdiction. Eleanor Kowalski's death was ruled accidental, a confused elderly woman who took the wrong combination of medications. The other elderly participants received proper medical evaluation and treatment for pharmaceutical poisoning, but the systemic problems that made them vulnerable to exploitation remain unchanged. Mr. Marshall, Ethan says, looking up from the keyboard, do you think we saved people? The question deserves honesty, even when honesty is complicated. We stopped Susan Walsh's operation. We helped your neighbors return to medications that support their natural rhythms instead of fighting them. And we gave federal investigators information that might prevent similar operations in other communities. But the system that lets pharmaceutical companies exploit elderly people? That's a bigger symphony than we can conduct alone. But sometimes stopping one movement of injustice is enough to change the entire composition. Ethan nods and returns to his playing, creating melodies that suggest hope, tempered by awareness of how complex the world really is. His gift for hearing biological rhythms continues, but now he also creates music of his own, rhythms that speak to healing rather than analysis, harmony rather than chaos. My phone rings, and Agent Torres's voice carries the satisfaction of someone who's made progress against institutional corruption. "Ray, thought you'd want to know. We arrested 3 more healthcare workers running similar operations in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Ethan's rhythm analysis provided the template for medical testing that documented pharmaceutical poisoning in 47 elderly victims. Any word on Susan Walsh? Still missing, but we've frozen accounts linked to Meridian Pharmaceuticals worth $37 million. Money talks, even when the people who made it disappear into witness protection." After hanging up, I listened to Ethan's music filling the room with sounds that suggest the possibility of justice, even in systems designed to serve institutions rather than individuals. His rhythm analysis helped save people whose voices had been silenced by experimental pharmaceuticals, but his piano playing creates something new, the sound of a child who's learned to trust his own music even when the world around him plays discordant songs. "Ethan," I say as I prepare to leave, "what does my rhythm sound like now?" He pauses in his playing, tilting his head to listen to biological patterns that exist beyond normal perception. Still sad music in the background that never goes away completely. But now there's something else. Satisfaction rhythms, like people's bodies sound when they've finished difficult work that needed to be done. The observation is more accurate than any psychological evaluation I've ever received. The sadness of Emma and Sarah will always provide background music to my life, but helping to protect Ethan and his neighbors has added new harmonies, the sound of purpose fulfilled, justice served, children protected from monsters who wear medical degrees and institutional authority. As I walk to my car, I can hear Ethan's piano music drifting through the evening air, mixing with the normal sounds of suburban life. Dinner conversations, television programs, the ordinary rhythms of families who don't know how close they came to, losing loved ones to pharmaceutical chaos disguised as medical progress. Sometimes the most important music is the kind that reminds us that individual voices matter, even when institutions try to reduce them to data points in research studies that prioritize scientific advancement over human survival. And sometimes, a 12-year-old boy with extraordinary abilities can hear the truth that adults have been trained to ignore, that every person's biological rhythm deserves to play its own song without interference from those who profit from creating. Fact Box: Biorhythmic sensitivity. The ability described in this story has real roots in medical practice. Some people with epilepsy develop an increased sensitivity to electrical fields and can sometimes sense oncoming seizures not only in themselves but also in others with similar neurological conditions. This phenomenon is linked to changes in the brain's function after repeated epileptic episodes, making the nervous system more responsive to subtle electrical signals. Documented cases include people with epilepsy being able to predict heart attacks, blood pressure changes, and even pregnancy in close relatives by reacting to barely perceptible shifts in their bioelectrical activity. While Ethan's ability is portrayed in an enhanced, fictionalized way for the story, the foundation of this phenomenon exists in real neuropsychology and continues to be studied by specialists.